Mary Ugolini here with Rebel News, and in today's report, we will hear from lawyer Eva Chipiuk on her recent filing of a $10.5 million lawsuit launched on behalf of her client, Carrie Sakamoto. Sakamoto has suffered from a laundry list of debilitating physical, neurological, and psychological impairments following her Pfizer injection, where she took to social media shortly thereafter asking for help because she wasn't getting any answers from her team of doctors, nor was her condition improving.
I'm 46. I had no prior health issues. I got my first vaccine, which was AstraZeneca. My husband and I got it at the same time. We got it in April 12th. By July 1st, I was in hospital with full-blown Bell's palsy.
As a result of the massive psychological deployment of the safe and effective narrative unleashed on the Canadian public by various public health officials, further amplified by Canadian legacy media, counsel for Sakamoto, Chipiuk, joins me now to discuss the lawsuit and the statement of claim. Check it out.
I think you and your viewers can appreciate that what we witnessed over this COVID pandemic and with respect to the COVID vaccines is something we've never seen in Canada or in the world before. What we had was a very serious, coordinated messaging campaign that was pushed by public health officials in Canada, provincially and federally, and also broadcast through the Canadian Broadcasting Company, our state broadcaster, like you said, that first was really promoting fear narrative in Canada. And then once the vaccines came out, that was the message that all Canadians were getting. If you want to go back to reality, back to normalcy, take the shot, get the shot. As quickly as you can, run, get the shot, even some public health officers said on television, on the radio. These are actions that maybe only one person in your life should ever be telling you, and that would be your medical doctor based on your medical history. So what we saw is unprecedented in Canada. So the lawsuit is structured differently than like a typical negligence claim for product liability or a medical malpractice. Those would be the two that you, I think, would normally see in an injury of this sort. But what we've done is we've highlighted the fact, and I don't know if many Canadians know this because this is a huge component, is when a drug is approved in Canada, normally there's a requirement that it be safe and effective. For the COVID vaccines, an exception was made that the COVID vaccine did not have to be either safe or effective. They put in a new test, and that new test was that there had to be more benefits than harm. But that's a subjective test. How do we know if there's more benefits than harm if we don't even know whether it's safe and effective? So it's kind of a circular argument and a very strange test to put forward. But not only that, they knew that there was no safety or effectiveness measure, and it was approved. And yet, what did you hear for 2 years? It's safe and effective. Go take the vaccine. It's safe and effective. Go and take the vaccine. So we have a different type of lawsuit we're looking at. So like you said, I think it's negligence, misrepresentation. And also, we are talking about an element of misfeasance in public office. So there was bad faith. They knew that there was no requirement that the vaccines be safe or effective, yet they promoted them as safe and effective.
And for your client here, who was quote unquote really doing her part to get back to normal with the, that carrot of freedom wagging in front of everybody's faces after 2 years of rolling lockdowns and restrictions and public health measures, what was the result of that safe and effective marketing campaign on this client? What are some of the things that she's suffering with now?
Oh, her life's been turned completely upside down. This is a mother of three that was living on a farm outside of Lethbridge. And all overnight, basically, She's unable to walk, unable to eat, unable to live independently. That's what happened. And she's still dealing with a lot of these issues. So one of the requirements for her to leave the hospital, because she ended up being hospitalized for 17 days, was that she had to be able to walk again with a walker and to chew her food, so that because she had a feeding tube. This is very serious, what happened to her, obviously, and the consequences she is still dealing with. She still has a lot of memory problems, balance problems, sleeping problems, vision problems, hearing problems, pain problems. The list goes on.
And so her life has been devastated and, as you mentioned, completely flipped upside down. I think also you mentioned that she had to sell her farm as a result and completely relocate due to the magnitude of this injury.
Yeah, so she wasn't able to live independently anymore. And not surprisingly, she had a lot of appointments and had to be at the doctors a lot. So she just wasn't able to manage that from her farmhouse and with 3 kids. So they had to quickly sell off the farm at a loss, move to Lethbridge so she could actually go to appointments and be there. And so, yeah, there's not only physically, mentally, real financial losses that happened. Mm-hmm. It's really a devastating story.
And you mentioned in there that she's been modestly compensated by the newly instituted VISP program, the Vaccine Injury Support Program, a federal government initiative in direct response to COVID-19 vaccine injuries. And we've covered the program rollout and the amounts that have been stipulated in that program extensively before. Also hearing from many people who either don't get their vaccine injury documented at all or have to go through mountains of paperwork and bureaucratic red tape and various bureaucracies to even get their claim seen, whether or not it will be finally approved. But Carrie, Ms. Sakamoto did have her vaccine injury adequately documented. It did go through the VISP program. What was that like for your client?
So it's not part of the lawsuit, but what I've heard about it is really tragic as well. That just would add an extra layer and complexity if we were to include that in the lawsuit here. But she was diagnosed in hospital when she originally was in the hospital over 2 years ago with the Pfizer vaccine being the cause of her injury. And it was immediately reported to Ottawa under the program. It took nearly 2 years to get recognition and any acknowledgement of it. It really, from what I heard from Carrie, it was just really all she had to do was fight all the time. She's already in such a vulnerable position. And then she's got to advocate and fight just to get some recognition for that. And that was heartbreaking on its own. And I use the word vulnerable, and that's something I didn't use earlier. With the COVID pandemic, that's really how a lot of Canadians felt. They felt very vulnerable. And who put them in that vulnerable position? That was our government officials, public health officials, that were instilling that vulnerability in people and then were instructed to take something that would help manage this. And again, that goes back to how the lawsuit has been drafted.
And I suppose a large part of this lawsuit then is to seek accountability for this messaging, this push on citizens pretty much indiscriminately from, ages 5 and up, really, with various marketing campaigns geared specifically toward them and shaping their behavior to comply. What are you hoping that this lawsuit will achieve in regard to that government accountability stipulation?
Well, that's a major component. And Carrie is very clear about this as well, as she wants to know who is responsible. And she said it publicly. Is it her because she took a vaccine, or is it the government who implored her to take the vaccine? There was no other reason for her to take a vaccine except for the messaging that was received from the government and through the CBC. So who is responsible? And then how do we work? What do we do after? How do we make this better? How do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? If there are no lawsuits, if there is no accountability, can we expect this next year? And is that something we want as Canadians? Or are we going to say, no, something wasn't right here, something went wrong, and we need to correct that? And that's what we're hoping to do through this lawsuit as well.
And so why the 10.5 million? Can you break that down? I know the statement of claim does, but for our viewers, can you break down why that was a settled on number?
Right. So it's broken down into 3 different categories of damages. The first is general damages, and that's claimed at $5 million. And to preface, all of these are just estimates right now. With all of it, we're going to have to prove everything in court, and it's going to take a long process, we expect. So general damages are anything soft tissue related. So if you were in a car accident, for example, that would be whiplash injury. But in this case, Carrie has suffered incredible damages physically, psychologically, etc. And those would be under that category. So we've claimed at $5 million. She's got paralysis of her face, like she couldn't walk, couldn't eat. It's a very serious injury, psychologically and physically. Special damages are claimed at $2.5 million, and special damages are anything kind of that you have a receipt for. So a lot of the treatments that she's needs and she's going to continue to need, those costs will cost a lot of money. So that's under that category, as well as things like the rush sale of her farm. So any loss on that would go through the special damages. And at this point, it seems like a very reasonable estimate given the amount of costs and losses she's already experienced. And then the final head of compensation is punitive damages. And that one is called, basically, it's like a punishment that the defendants acted in a not a great manner. So they would be, that's the additional one. That's one you wouldn't have to prove. So we've claimed $3 million for punitive damages. And that's where we really would hope that the government starts to take notice and is held accountable. Because if a judge says to the government, okay, this went way too far here, we don't want to ever see this again. Now, not only are we going to compensate damages for what Carrie's experienced, but we're going to go over and above, and we're going to now say X amount of dollars for punitive damages because this just went way too far. You have to be held accountable for your actions.
And I suppose if that were the case, that would set a precedence for anyone else who's struggling similarly to Ms. Sakamoto, would benefit them moving forward if they wanted to pursue anything legally.
Yeah, definitely. This would be a case that could open some doors. And I anticipate that will be one of the reasons that will be fought very hard against it, because it would open the doors. But we have to start asking ourselves as Canadians is, what is it? Are we just going to sit back and let this stuff happen? Or are we going to challenge the government, because that's in our right to do that, and ensure that they're doing the best that they can do? This isn't about pointing fingers so much so as ensuring that we do the best and we move forward in the best manner possible. We're all taxpayers, Carrie included, and we pay significant amounts in taxpayer dollars here in Canada. So are we getting the best value? Maybe we should check in on that via the courts or any other way, and just ensure that they're being held to account. One thing I'll note too is that, some people have said, of course, the payout, if any, would be from taxpayer dollars. Yes, that is correct. But anything you look around is taxpayer dollars. And we have so much unaccountability from our government. And just one figure for your viewers to note is the government spends $1.2 billion a day. That's just the federal government. So they've got a big pocketbook of money. And that's something that we need to recognize. And we have to start holding the government to account. Carrie has suffered in this case, and it needs to be recognized as well.
Recognized and also reined in. And so that is obviously a big part of what you're doing here. I know the wheels of justice are slow turning, but what do you anticipate in terms of a timeline on something like this, just in closing?
Yeah, great question. And I really can't, it's very hard to answer that question. We expect there to be a few heated legal battles. Again, like I mentioned, what we anticipate is that all of these bodies that we served will say, we weren't responsible. We had nothing to do with it. Carrie made a decision on her own. So it's going to be a big struggle, and we anticipate that to be one of the first things to come forward. I could be wrong, but I anticipate this will take a while to get resolved.
If you'd like to contribute to help with Sakamoto's psychological and comprehensive medical assessments in an effort to push back on the misinformation campaign launched against anyone who so much as questioned that safe and effective narrative, then you can visit the Empowered Canadians website and or the Institute for Freedom and Justice, both organizations that are working to increase government accountability through litigation that upholds good governance while protecting individual rights and freedoms. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. If the Liberals get away with their censorship plans, then you would be none the wiser to the pharma propaganda that compelled people like Carrie Sakamoto to get injected. If you recognize that freedom of the press and independent media is crucial to offer an alternative voice to the government cheerleading mainstream media, then please consider supporting our work at stopthecensorship.ca. You can sign our petition and find out what we're doing to combat the increasingly censorious government at that special website, stopthecensorship.ca.